I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Directors for Vallecitos Water District for Wednesday, May 20th, 2020 at 5 p.m. And before we go further, I'm going to read our notice to the public. So those of you who, if you can't see that, just in case. Due to the situation with the COVID coronavirus and the executive order N3520, so long as state and local public health officials have imposed or recommended social distancing measures, Vallecitos Water District will hold future meetings via teleconferencing and allow members of the public to observe and address the meeting telephonically or otherwise electronically. During this period of time, Vallecitos Water District will not be making any physical location available for members of the public to observe the meeting and offer public comment. The public is encouraged to watch and participate in the meeting from the safety of their homes. The meeting can be viewed on the agenda page located on the main page of the district's website. Public comments or questions can be submitted to the following email address: publiccomment@vwd.org. All written comments that are received at least 90 minutes before the meeting will be provided to the board, and a record of the receipt of comment will be noted during the meeting. Members of the public viewing the meeting via the Zoom video conferencing platform can express their desire to provide input at the appropriate time by utilizing the raise hand function. Additional instructions for online participation will be posted on the district's website, www.vwd.org/meetings. And with that, we'll jump into roll call. Director Elitharp.
Present.
Thank you. Director Martin.
Present.
Thank you. Director Sinella.
Present.
Thank you. Director Hernandez.
Present.
Thank you. Director Evans. I'm here as well. So we're all here and happy to be here. And now we need a motion to adopt the agenda for the regular meeting.
So moved, Director Martin.
Thank you. It's been moved by Director Martin and has it seconded by
Sinella.
Director Sinella that we adopt the agenda for this meeting. Those in favor will answer by roll call. Director Elitharp.
Yes.
Director Martin.
Yes.
Director Sinella.
Yes.
Director Hernandez.
Yes.
And I'll say yes too. So it's accepted unanimously. Now we'll move to public comment, and I don't know if we have any at this time. Glenn, do you have any that wish to speak? I don't have a voice for you, Glenn. Are you on mute?
Yes, I was. I apologize. I'm looking at the attendees list, and it does not look like anybody's expressed a desire to speak at this time.
Okay, so at this point, no one answered. We'll move on to our consent calendar.
Director Hernandez, move to approve.
Thank you, Director Hernandez. And a second?
Director Martin, second.
By Director Martin. It's been moved and seconded to accept the consent calendar, and we'll answer by roll call. Director Hernandez.
Yes.
Director Sinella.
Yes.
Director Elitharp.
Yes.
Director Martin.
Yes.
And I'll say yes as well, so it passes unanimously. And now we're going to move straight on to our action items. We have two today. The first one is the project acceptance for the sewer lining and rehabilitation of 2019. And I'm not sure who will be speaking on that.
Yeah, I think Ryan has that topic. Is that right, James?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, Ryan will take that.
I'm going to share my screen right now with the group. You should all see the plat map on your screens.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you, Board of Directors. I'm here tonight with the project acceptance for the sewer lining and rehab 2019 project. O&M and structural deficiencies were identified in various existing segments of the various 8-inch vitrified clay pipe and ductile iron pipe sanitary sewer segments throughout the district. totaling 59 various locations, including 54 full section repair segments, totaling roughly 12,000 feet. 35 full section repairs were made in the Lake San Marcos area, totaling roughly 7,200 feet. And there were 5 total point repairs as part of the project. Pipe integrity can be lost over time due to any combination of operational and maintenance issues or structural defects. Rehabilitation of these pipe sections was accomplished using cured in place pipe liners. CIPP liners utilize trenchless technology to make full structural repairs from within the host pipe. Staff opened bids from 3 contractors with in situ form technologies selected as the lowest responsive bidder. The board awarded the $631,472 contract to in situ form on January 15th, 2020. The board at that time, the budget at that time was increased from $812,000 to $962,000 to accommodate the combined project services of the original sewer lining and the Lake San Marcos sewer lining projects. Over the course of the project, a total of 6 change orders were negotiated, resulting in a $21,185 credit. District staff self-performed the planning, design, construction management, and inspection, and engineering services during construction. Construction was recently completed on May 7th, roughly 2 months in advance from what was originally anticipated. And the fiscal impacts, the original combined project budgets total roughly $1.4 million. On that January 15th date, when we awarded the contract to in situ form, the board adjusted the budget to $962,000 based on staff recommendations over the anticipated duration of the project. The construction contract totaled $631,472, and we had a $21,185 credit in the resultant 6 change orders at the end. One thing James has me do is to evaluate the cost effectiveness of performing projects like this in-house versus finding a consultant to come on board and manage the project. This project ended up being a very good in-house design and construction project for the district, where we were able to closely manage both planning, design, and construction services in combination with a very competitive low bid from a very well-qualified contractor and a very abbreviated construction schedule during a rather unknown period of time in society. We ended up totaling in the project after staff overhead for design and construction services. The total project amount was $782,287, which resulted in a nearly $180,000 budget surplus from the total budget, which was adjusted in January. Overall, from the original project budget pre-January, the total surplus is in excess of $600,000. And with that, staff recommends project acceptance and authorizing the general manager to file a notice of completion and release retention of funds to the contractor in accordance with the contract documents.
And President Evans, this is Glenn, if I may, just want to brag a little bit about staff. It's a pretty quick turnaround time. This project was awarded in January, and we're in front of you in May with a notice of completion. And we did 2 miles of pipe rehabilitation, and we went through historic rains and dealing with the COVID issue. So I think staff and our contractor did an awesome job to get this turned around so quickly to get such an important project done.
Wow, I think so, and way below budget. Would any of the directors wish to make a comment or a question or anything?
Director Martin?
Yes, Director Martin.
Comment, well, it sounds terrific. That's getting a job well earlier than expected. And I'm assuming that your department, along with James, actually saved us a lot of time by doing it in-house rather than out-house. Is that correct?
That's true. James, you may want to address that.
Yeah, Director Martin, absolutely. So one of the things I had Ryan do is take a look at what it would cost both from a schedule, from a consultant, and also a cost of doing business with a consultant. We still have to manage the consultant, so our cost doesn't go to zero. But we save somewhere close to an estimated $80,000 and shaved a good month to a month and a half off the job by doing this one in-house.
Great job, great savings. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other directors?
Yeah, this is Director Sanella. Just wanted to echo the positive feedback. Well done. It looks good. Looks like it's going to, really help out with the sewer system. So appreciate it.
Well, I would like to ask one question. Maybe it's kind of two. It's how often have we used the CIPP liner before? Is this the first time, or have we done this before?
Hey, James, you can take that.
President Evans, so basically this is kind of a reoccurring type of job. That's one of the reasons we could do it in-house so efficiently. Our operations staff videos the sewer system and identifies areas of problems, and then we put them into a group project. So we wait till we have enough of them, unless there's an emergency, obviously, and then we basically try to get some value by combining these projects together for a contractor to make it attractive for them to bid and get competitive bids on. So we've used these liners in several different areas to help, especially with the old clay sewers, where there's either a separation in the sewer or actually a crack in the sewer. So we've used this type of lining system, and it's been used throughout the industry for at least a couple decades.
For some reason, I just didn't remember the particular letters to it. So, and then when we do this, what's the life expectancy or extension to the pipes in this process? And what did we used to do?
So we used to replace the pipe or go in there and do spot repairs, which means digging up the roads. And then as far as the life expectancy, we're adding basically another 30 years to 50 years of value. If you ask the liner guys, it makes it a new pipe. I don't know if I 100% agree with that, but we are definitely extending the life 30 plus years.
No, that's remarkable for the savings. Good, just echoing the other directors. Really great job. Thank you so much.
President
any more
Evans,
comments?
we do have Mr. Hunsaker. Looks like he wants to make a comment on this item.
Oh, great. Thank you, Mr. Hunsaker.
Go ahead, Mr. Hunsaker.
Okay, can you see me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. I also want to commend the district on getting much better value for the dollars, taxpayer dollars. You're using competitive bidding, no lease backs. Apparently you're not using or need to use PLAs. And the consulting costs have been fairly reasonable. As you're probably aware, I have served or am serving on 5 different citizen bond oversight committees, and we're seeing increases in construction costs of 1.5% per month. And Vista just recently passed a bond, and they haven't even really just got it started, and they're already talking about cutting back on expectations of citizens of what their bond money is going to buy. So what are your expectations for inflation of construction costs at this point? The rationale I am getting repeatedly is, well, there's a shortage of construction labor, and they're only getting 1 to 3 different competitors bidding on these projects. So what are you looking for in the future as far as inflation of costs of construction. Thank you.
And do either of you want to say anything about our expectations at this point?
Well, I guess I'll take a shot at it. This is Glenn. We're hopeful that with the downturn in the economy that we're going to have a very aggressive bidding climate. I think a lot of agencies that let out contracts for public works projects, they're going to be watching their dollars very carefully and maybe deferring projects. So the agencies that do have work to be done will have a big candidate pool of contractors that will be bidding on those jobs, and competition always results in typically results in lower costs. So it's early. I mean, most of what I'm saying is related to COVID, and it's a little early to tell what the bidding climate will be like in the COVID era, but we certainly are hopeful that our bid climate will be favorable. And James, if you have something to add to that.
Sure. Thank you, General Manager Prum. So, Mr. Hunsaker, the other thing we do is we do track the cost index from ENR on the construction, and we work with our neighboring agencies to see what costs they're getting on similar projects. So, a project that's budgeted for July 1st budget, for example, if the project's not being bid out for 6 months, we'll go ahead and kind of estimate based on existing bids, what we're seeing, and also the ENR index to kind of keep track of it. It's not a perfect system, but it helps us at least keep up a little bit. Again, I do echo the same sentiment that from General Manager Prum, that we're actually hoping that the bid environment is going to be aggressive, and the job that we have out to bid right now, there appears to be a lot of interest, more interest than normal. It is a bigger job though, so we're hoping that equates to more competitive bid pricing.
President Evans,
Oops. Yes, Director Hernandez.
Director Hernandez. Interestingly enough, at our capital committee this morning at Encina, we too have a project that our staff was quite surprised at how many bidders showed up for the pre-bid conference. And we're told that a number of agencies are stalling their bidding because they believe, much as Director Prum had indicated, that with this COVID virus, that things are only going to get better. So I think the school district needs to probably rethink their discussion, because I think pricing is going to come down and more people are going to be interested in doing work. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's a good point. This is just a side comment for you, Jonathan. While James was speaking, I kept losing his voice in and out. So I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Am I supposed to tell you at the time or after? But
yeah, it sounded okay on my end. I'm not sure if anybody else had the same problems or not.
Okay.
It was clear on my end as well, President Evans.
All right, then I just work through that. So let's see, what do we need? We need move to approval of this project, I believe. Is that correct?
So moved.
Is
so
that you,
moved,
Director
Director.
Martin?
Yes, it is.
Oh, thank you. It's been moved by Director Martin and seconded by,
Director Hernandez.
thank you, Director Hernandez. And we'll do roll call. Director Hernandez,
Yes.
Director Sinella,
Yes.
Director Elitharp,
Yes.
Director Martin,
Yes.
and Director Evans will also say yes. I'm calling you by memory, so I'm sorry if I keep jumbling you up, but you're answering really well. It's been moved and seconded and approved unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, item 2.2, the Vallecitos Water District proposed fiscal year 2020-2021 budget. And
Yeah,
I don't know who gets that first. Is that you, Mr. Prum?
I'll kick it off real quickly and then turn it over to Wes. So the board will remember that last Monday on May 11th, we had a budget workshop, and it was the board's first exposure, the full board's first exposure to where staff was heading on a budget recommendation. What you saw at that meeting on the 11th was an initial, we called it a base budget, which is the budget we would have been presenting had COVID not reared its ugly head. Also at that meeting, we talked about what the fiscal impacts we thought COVID would have on us, and we gave the board some ideas of adjustments that staff would be recommending, and we were heading towards what we are calling our COVID budget. So at that meeting, we received some feedback from the board. What you're going to hear today is we're not going to talk about the base budget anymore. We're going to be talking about the budget that we're going to be presenting, which acknowledges the impacts that COVID is having on the district. So keep that in mind as we go forward with this, that what you're hearing today is a good preview as to what you're going to see on June 3rd when the board is being asked to formally adopt the budget. So tonight's meeting is somewhat similar to the board workshop. We're not asking for a final approval of the budget, but we certainly are looking for any input that the board may have to guide the final document. And there is one area regarding PERS payments that we do want some specific information from the board, but Wes will walk you through that conversation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Wes and he can make the presentation.
Good evening. I got to share my screen here. Good evening, President Evans, members of the board. I just got kicked out and came back in.
Oh.
Let's see what I got. Okay, I got to share that one.
We're talking about the budget.
Yep.
Okay.
Is my screen shared?
Not yet.
I can see you.
Okay, so that should be good. Okay. Okay. Feels like
Hey, President Evans, I can still see the Brady Bunch scene, but I can't see the presentation.
Yeah, Wes, we can't see your presentation.
Oh, that's interesting. I have numbers on my screen. That's all I have. Typically, I just click on, hold on, let me see. Share screen. Yeah, it's not giving me the screen to share.
Should be able to be for all panelists.
Can you see anything now?
No.
It's you.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not sharing. Hold on. Oh, I'll fix it.
You don't have that green button on the bottom in the middle that says share screen?
Yeah, and when I do that, it just brings up 3 screens and numbers them all for me. So let me,
Take our word, the presentation's beautiful.
yes, it's great.
Wes, you should be able to click on one of the screens.
There it is.
There it is. It's coming up.
Yep.
So can you still see
Well
the
done.
presentation?
We can see it now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Wes, it's not in the regular presentation mode, though. It shows your notes and the upcoming slide as well.
Okay, hold on.
There you
There
go.
we go.
We wanted to see the notes behind the scenes.
No, not going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we really want.
I want to know which one of our employees is playing in the water.
That's my child.
Yeah, you know, I don't even know who that is, to be honest. Yeah. Okay. Well, let me start the presentation then, now that it's up on your screen. Welcome. Feels like it's been forever, right? Long time. At least a week.
At least.
So tonight's presentation is going to be very similar to the presentation we had on May 11th. It's important to note that in the last presentation, we presented you with the base budget and the COVID impacts. So now we're bringing forward the draft proposed budget with all the COVID impacts incorporated in there as presented at the last meeting, as well as any suggested changes. So here's the budget party page. This is the one where I get you all excited before I put you to sleep with my presentation. And then the agenda for tonight, we're going to go over the budget process and calendar. I'll go over that pretty quickly just to give you the update so I don't go through it step by step again. Then we'll talk about just a recap of the COVID-19 financial plan as presented last time. And then using that, we'll show you the budget. So we'll go into the budgeted operating expenses for water and wastewater, salaries and benefits. And it's important to note that salaries and benefits actually did not change. Mike will talk about water sales and purchases, and he'll also talk about sewer revenue. And then I'll go over the capital budget and the reserve balances. And finally, we'll talk about the CalPERS UAL funding. So with all the COVID challenges that the district's been facing, we haven't talked much about the CalPERS UAL funding. And if you remember last year, that was our major challenge. And we developed a 3-year policy to pay off the CalPERS unfunded accrued liability. So part of that policy says that we will give you annual updates with the latest valuation and present options to you to address the liability. So that's what we'll be talking about at the end of the presentation. So the budget process and calendar, and we started in December, January, February, did a whole lot of work. And then we had 4 meetings with the Finance Committee from March through April. And then in May, we had the board workshop to discuss the COVID-19 financial plan. Now incorporated all items from that meeting into the base budget and created the proposed draft proposed budget. Meeting will be reviewing that budget. And then after the meeting, we'll take any board requested items and incorporate them, and we'll revise and refine it. And in June, we'll hopefully bring forward a recommended budget for board approval. And then the finish line. Any more exciting questions like that probably keep more people awake. So the COVID-19 financial plan. So COVID-19 is one of our major challenges this year. And, you know, with guidance from the board and basically through staff's working over the last few months, we've developed a COVID-19 financial plan. And with board's guidance, the plan we've developed is to estimate the impacts of COVID-19, and we will do that by using reliable sources, citing recent and relevant data regarding observed and anticipated financial and operational water utility impacts. Then we will monetize those impacts. We'll apply them specifically to Vallecitos, to our customer composition and our financial characteristics. Next, we budget for those items. So after we monetize them, we incorporate them into the budget for the current year and for the 5-year plan. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We've now incorporated those in the budget and the 5-year plan, and we're going to be showing you the results of that. Then we will track them. And actually, part of the tracking and the updating is to present the progress to the board. And tonight we have a special presentation after the budget presentation, and a sort of guest speaker and our customer service representative, our supervisor, Alicia Saavedra, will be here to help us present some of our statistics that we track and give a first round at the presenting the impacts or the tracking of those stats. So we estimated the impacts of COVID by using the financial impact of COVID-19 crisis on U.S. drinking water utilities by Raftellus and commissioned by the American Water Works Association. In this study, Raftellus actually surveyed 55 agencies or water utilities throughout the U.S. and also cited several sources, including the census and other studies, as shown here. The purpose of it was to estimate the aggregate financial impacts on drinking water utilities due to the following things listed here, which are changes in utility policies, losses in revenue, operational actions taken, reducing, deferring, or eliminating capital expenditures, reduction in system development charges and user charges from new growth. And by using the study and the methodology developed by Raftellus, we were able to estimate the impacts on Vallecitos. And these are the most affected areas, including lost water sales due to decreased demand. And we've estimated the impact on that to be a 35% reduction in commercial usage and an increase in residential of 5%. Increase in bad debt expense due to customers being unable to pay, we've estimated or calculated at 10 times the current levels. Reduced delinquency charges due to change in policy. So we're waiving late fees if the customer calls in and says they're impacted by COVID. And we estimate this to be a 70% reduction in our current delinquency fees. Reduced lock charges due to change in policy. We're no longer locking, so we're not collecting the lock charges and we're not getting that revenue. So that's 100% reduction in lock charges for the year. And reduction in capacity fees due to slow growth. According to Raftellus, they estimate the reduction in growth to be 75% in the upcoming budget year. So we've incorporated that into the draft proposed budget. So using these, we had to monetize the impacts using their methodology. And this slide I know is a lot of numbers. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I just wanted you to feel our pain a little bit as far as how we calculated all these numbers. And using this, you can see this is the bad debt expense calculation, and bad debt was calculated at 8.08% of the total revenues for water. For sewer, it's 0.07%. And extrapolating that with their methodology, we estimated an increase in bad debt expense for water to be $322,000 and for sewer to be $128,000. Those are both in the draft proposed budget shown today, and we'll go over that in a minute. So for the budget, we budgeted the impacts. The impacted areas for water are shown here, and we estimated lost water sales using the methodology and calculations shown before. So water sales are 1.7 million, decreased water purchases 870,000, lock charges 243, delinquency fees at 136,000, increased bad debt expense at 322,000, and the total COVID impact to be $1.6 million. So to budget for that for water, we've proposed the following actions and incorporated them into the draft proposed budget. We were able to find some capital project revisions in the amount of $710,000, some delayed vehicle purchases for $144,000. We found some operational cuts of $87,000, and our total COVID offsets for water are $941,000. Looking at sewer, the impacted areas are lost sewer revenue at $770,000. Delinquency fees are estimated to decrease by $46,000. Increased bad debt expense, that'll actually increase by $128,000 for sewer. And the total COVID impact for the sewer will be $944,000. Now, the actions we're proposing in reaction to that are, we found some capital project revisions of $1.4 million, 1.5 almost. Delayed vehicle purchase of $138,000. We have some operational cost cuts in the amount of $67,000. And our total COVID offsets are $1.7 million. And that's for sewer. So all of these changes have now been incorporated into the draft proposed budget. So now I'll be presenting the draft proposed budget with these included in them. So everything I'm going to be presenting now has taken into account.
Question.
Yes,
Yeah.
for it.
Hi, Wes. It's Martin.
Hey,
Lost sewer revenue. How do we lose sewer revenue? Explain that to me.
so some of our customers are based on our billed sewer charges based on flow. So that portion of our customer charges that are based on flow, since our flow will be reduced for water sales, it's also going to impact the sewer revenue.
What customers do we have that are charged on flow? My understanding is we don't have flow meters on sewer.
We do have some, there aren't many. Mike Arthur is here, and I think he has more information on that than I do.
Yeah, there are some customers that, if there aren't necessarily flow meters, there's an estimated amount of return to sewer. So for example, for every 10 units of water that they use, consume, 80% of it returns to the sewer. So we'll charge them 8 units of flow for the sewer. So those are the customers that Finance Manager Owen was talking about, that we're going to lose some of those sales because they're not using as much water. Therefore, there's not as much return to flow. And I believe Director Elitharp asked a question last time, and I think the number was about 15% of our revenues do come from sewer flow.
Okay. Did that help?
Okay.
Mark?
No, but thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the budget. Page is our home.
President Evans, I have a question. Director Elitharp, could you go back to that last slide? Thanks, Wes. On the sewer, on the actions proposed, why are we looking for COVID offsets of 50% higher than the impact?
So it's not that we're looking for it. It was that in going through the reviewing the budget to find possible revisions or savings in reaction to the impacted areas, we were able to find some capital projects that were not realistic and that we wouldn't be able to finish them. So that's why they're capital project revisions. So it just so happened that since we had so many sewer projects, that we're able to sort of shift around the cost of those projects and when they'd be performed. And it just happened we had more in the amount than actually the impacted area COVID were. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, you can go on, Wes. Thank you.
Okay, so the budget, the draft proposed budget, this is our home page. It's page 2 of your budget. And hopefully everybody got a copy of the draft proposed budget in the board packet, as well as we sent out the materials and services, which details all the line items for all the expenses for the draft proposed budget. So the home page here shows the draft proposed budget total is $90.6 million for fiscal year 21. The top categories up here are all reserve funded, and we'll be going into the water operations and capital purchases, or CIP, and Mike will talk about the water purchases after, or actually kind of before I talk about CIP. Same old, same old. So first, going into water purchases, water operating expenses are $12.8 million, or 14% of the total budget. This slide shows a summary of the water operating expenses of $42.7 million. And it's important to note that of that, 70% is water purchases, or $29.9 million. I'm going to go into the other 3 categories. So this is a summary of page 11 of your budget detailing the water operating expenses. And as you can see, water operating expenses are budgeted to decrease by $1.6 million. The majority of this is because of the decrease in water purchases. Mike will talk about water purchases and sales after this. Operations are budgeted to increase by $94,000, mainly as a result of an increase in pumping charges of $128,000. Support is now budgeted to increase by $494,000, and that's as a result of the COVID impacts, the $322,000 estimated increase in bad debt expense, as well as, what else do we have? IT had $70,000 increase in outside services for contract prices increasing. So that's the water operating expense summary. Moving on back to the home page. Now we'll talk about the sewer operating expenses of $13.3 million, which is 15% of the total operating budget, or total budget, sorry, not operating budget. So this slide shows on page 20 of your budget, and the summary of the sewer operating expenses, and 46% are treatment costs, or $6.1 million. This is a summary of page 21 of the budget, which summarizes the sewer operating expenses. And you can see that the sewer revenues are budgeted to decrease by $500,000, mainly as a result of the lost sewer revenue due to the COVID impact. Sewer operating expenses are budgeted to decrease by $935,000, mainly as a result of a decrease in treatment costs of $922,000. And that's a result of a decrease in the Encina budget, as well as the metal arc plant. And the support is budgeted to increase by $93,000. That the majority of that is due to the COVID impact, which was estimated at $128,000 increase in bad debt expense. So I'm gonna move along to salaries and benefits if no one has any questions on the operating expenses. So this next slide is salaries and benefits, and this has not changed since the base budget, so we're presenting exactly the same numbers. And overall, salaries and benefits are budgeted to increase by $210,000. Total benefits are budgeted to decrease by $530,000, and that's as a result of a decrease in PERS of $280,000 and a decrease in group insurance of $270,000, and that's because we fully funded the OPEB, so now it's being paid out of the trust and no longer an operating expense to the district. And total salaries and benefits is budgeted to decrease by $320,000 for the year. So the next slide, if no one has any questions on salaries and benefits, is just a really colorful slide, a graph that hopefully gets us away from the numbers. And this is just a slide of the salaries at the bottom and the benefits at the top. And the purpose of this slide is to show that as a result of efficient operations and management scrutinizing the needs for positions as they become vacant, we've been able to keep salaries and benefits steady and even actually realized a budget to actual savings over the years. And those are shown in percentages at the top. So back to the home page, the next slide. Now Mike's going to talk a little bit about water purchases and sales.
Great, thank you, Wes. President Evans, member of the board. Wes, if you can go to the next slide. So we do have 3 water sources that I wanted to go over with you. We have our desal water, which is a contractual amount of 3,500 acre feet per year. We have a contract amount with Elevenhain for 2,750 acre feet of water. And the remaining water that we will use will come directly from the Water Authority. Our total estimated purchases for the year are 13,445 acre feet. Go ahead. That equates to about $29 million to $29,930,000 that Wes mentioned a couple slides ago. And it's broken down by category, and it can, you'll see the price per acre foot for each of our water supply, along with the fixed cost. What's important to notice here is that we included an estimated 5% San Diego County Water Authority rate increase. Although just today they came out with their agenda for next week's board package, and they're estimating their rates could go up to as high as 6.3%. Now that differs by agency slightly depending on how much fixed costs you have. Typically, because we have some water on desal, we will probably not see the full 6.3% impact, but I'm expecting by the June 3rd, when we come back June 3rd, we'll probably have a slight uptick of this cost from $29,900, probably about another $170,000 for the increase that the Water Authority is proposing. What I also want to talk about is Wes mentioned that our water purchases are 70% of our budget. So it's important to note that even with a 5% increase, 70% of our budget at 5% would mean that 3.5% of our budget would go up regardless, before considering any labor, material, contracts, or energy costs. So for the fiscal year 2021 budget, we do put in an assumed customer rate increase. And right now, we're only proposing a 3.4% increase to the customers, even though our water costs right now, we have as 5%. So part of the cost we will be absorbing. And then for future years, we're estimating that future customer rate increases would be about 3.5% to 4%. And those are built into the budget. So when we do our 5-year plan, we do estimate rate increases of about 3.5% to 4% to 4.25% each year. So the next graph I wanted to show you shows our water sales history. And these 4 charts are 4 years worth of history, going back from the burnt orange color. Back in 2000 fiscal year 17-18, our sales were approximately 15,300 acre feet, going to this current budgeted fiscal year of about 12,500 acre feet. In the first year, in the fiscal year 17-18, you might be wondering why it was so high compared to the other years. 17-18 we had some rather warm summer months, so the consumption during the summer months were really high. The last 2 years, fiscal year 18-19, and our current fiscal year that we're in, fiscal year 19 and 20, we are showing some unusually wet winter months, so the sales have decreased from that first year. What Wes just pointed up now was the demand. We're showing the demand by our customer type. So when we do an analysis, we don't just do an across the board 5% increase, 5% decrease on our base amount. We look at basically our customer composition. So we'll look at residential, irrigation, our commercial industrial accounts, and our agricultural accounts to come up with our total demand per acre feet, for acre feet. And like I said, for this coming fiscal year, budgeted fiscal year, we're at about 12,500 acre feet, which would be our lowest as far as I remember, going back at least 10 years. So the next slide then, Wes, if you can, just shows our demand by customer type. So with the COVID, we expect a lot of decrease in our commercial and industrial accounts, but our commercial and industrial only make up 10% of our demand. And that 10% of our demand really only equates to 8% of our revenue base. So even though the commercial and industrial will be susceptible to the decreases for COVID, it's a rather smaller percentage of our total customer base. You'll notice our residential is almost 70% of our customer base. And we are projecting residential sales to go up by about 4 to 5% due to people staying at home, washing their hands more laundry and things like that. So our next slide will just show our overall revenues projected for next fiscal year are about $42.1 million. And it's made up of the commodity of 26.8 And as I mentioned, that does have a built-in approximate 3.4% rate increase to the customer. Our ready to serve charges will be about 14.5 million. And our other charges, which include pumping, late fees, and some interest, would be about $856,000. So the next slide, I've always mentioned that we always do a sensitivity analysis. So if for some reason COVID would be more of an impact than we plan, or if we come back out of COVID and businesses are up and running, just so the goalposts there are the minus 10% and the plus 10% demand. What that means is a minus 10%, if demand were to decrease by 10%, we would see a net impact in our reserves of about $1.4 million. If, on the other hand, we were to see an increase of about 10%, the positive impact on our reserves would be about $1.5 million. So that is, I believe it. Wes, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, that's all for the water portion of it. I'll stop there, though, before I get into the sewer, to see if there's any questions on any of the water charts that I went over.
Gentlemen? I think not.
Okay. So the sewer revenues, as we mentioned, there is some impact on COVID on the sewer flow. So our total revenue for the sewer section would be $20.2 million. And that's made up of, as Wes mentioned, the $17.3 million in sewer service charges. Our reclaimed water sales of about $2.8 million and other revenue of about $110,000. And I believe that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Mike.
Any other questions?
Madam President? Martin?
Yes, Director Martin.
Michael, I've watched you do this 8 times, and this is the best presentation yet. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Either that or you're getting me educated, slowly but surely.
Hopefully it's the latter. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Director Evans, I have a question.
Yes. Director Sinella, that's you?
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Michael, great job. When you were talking about water, you related it back to the rates and forecasted potential rate increases in the future, but you didn't touch on fixed cost or fixed rates for the sewer and that part of it. And I noticed that you guys were anticipating or trying to cut about $700,000 more than what was originally budgeted. Will that have any sort of reduction on the sewer service rates?
I don't believe so. I believe that the sewer did have a rate increase also built into it, but those were more mild of about 2% as far as I remember. I think some of these cuts, especially like the CIP, and correct me if I'm wrong, Wes or James, that they're deferred projects. So in the long run, it wouldn't have an overall impact on the 5-year plan.
Well, and there's no sewer rate increase incorporated into fiscal year 2021. It's just a demand. Originally, we had forecast a demand increase of about 0.3%, but with the COVID, we've now reduced it by the lost sewer revenue.
But when we talk about the 5-year forecast, there will be rate increases included in the projections. And when we look at the reserve levels, you'll see why future rate increases will be needed, even on the sewer side.
Okay.
Thank you.
Quick question again, sorry.
Yes.
But you just brought up sewer, and I just heard from Wes that there's no increase in sewer this year.
Correct. For fiscal year 2021, there are no projected rate increases for the sewer service charges. That is correct.
And I heard from you a maximum of 3.4 for water.
That's our estimated projection right now, yes.
That's the earliest you've ever given us those numbers. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. If there are no other questions, I'll move on to the capital improvement program. So back to the homepage, we can see that the CIP costs are $24.3 million for fiscal year 21 budgeted. That's 27% of the total budget for the year. And for 10 years, we're estimating $145 million in CIP costs. So this slide is a summary of the CIP costs for 10 years, budget to budget for 10 years from last year to this year. And the total, as I mentioned, was $144.9 million, or 145, summarized in the last slide. Of that, that's made up of $46.6 million in carryover projects. Those are projects that were budgeted in previous fiscal years. It could have been multi-year projects, and for whatever reason, they were completed, so they were carried forward to this year. Then we had new CIP request. That's made up of any additions to carryover projects if the prices change and we need to request more money for them, or if we have new projects that are requested for the current fiscal year. And finally, future projects. Future projects are projects that are budgeted to be worked on in the current fiscal year, but are included in the 5-year and 10-year plan for planning purposes. And vehicles and equipment is now budgeted at $881,000. That's down from $1,068,000 in the base budget, which was pre-COVID. So that's decreased by about $200,000. So the total change from year to year on the 10-year CIP is $5 million. And that resulted from a $1.6 million increase in the carryover projects, a $26.9 million increase in the new CIP requests. And that's mainly because we had future projects that were last year not budgeted for in the fiscal year, but have now been moved into this fiscal year because we're a year later and we're going to start working on those projects. So it's really just a shifting of costs from future to new CIP requests. So that's a summary of the 10-year CIP plan. And that's actually, should have said this at the beginning, but it's on pages 34 of the budget. 34 and 35 show the total CIP spending plan. And the vehicles and equipment are on page 94 of your budget. So this next slide shows the CIP costs over for 5 years for our 5-year plan, broken down by water and sewer. And as you can see, sewer has the majority of the projects, which is one of the reasons why Director Perrin was saying that rate increases would be necessary in the 5-year plan, because we have a lot of replacement projects and replacement projects that will have to be funded. So, and of the total 145 million, sewer is 106 million and water is 38.9. So then this slide here, basically all this slide is the same exact slide as the last one, except for this shows Encina's portion of our sewer projects. Because sewer is the majority of our CIP costs, we just want to show you the portion that Encina makes up of those costs. And the total $106 million in sewer projects that we have, of that, $30.4 million is our Encina projects. So after going through all of that, we talked about operating expenses, we talked about salaries and benefits, we've now talked about CIP costs and water sales and revenue and purchases, and that all rolls up in the end to our 5-year plan, which is done through our reserve projections. So this next slide is a lot of numbers. I just want to kind of give you a summary of how we do our 5-year plan and how it comes about. So we start doing that we start with our beginning reserve balance. Then we have our operating transfers, and that's our excess of our revenues over expenses for both water and sewer in this slide. And then we have other revenues that we collect, like capacity fees, property taxes, RDAs and pass-throughs, RDA pass-throughs, project reimbursements, and interest earnings. And then you have your capital outlay. Those are your CIP costs for the year. Then your vehicles and equipment, the PERS UAL funding, and the debt service costs, and that brings you to your ending balance and your reserves. And as you can see here, it's $63.7 million at the end of the fiscal year 2021. And I haven't mentioned yet, and I should stress it throughout this presentation, in the draft, we're always presenting the 1-year budget to be proposed with a 5-year plan. So everything we should really be focusing on the 2021 fiscal year. The rest of it is just a plan that we're proposing. So in fiscal year 2021, we have $63.7 million budgeted in reserves at the end of the year, and that's above the floor and below the ceiling, but I'll show you that in graphical format in a minute. But we're also above our days in cash threshold of 300 at 405, 387, 354, 387, and 383 over the next 5 years. It's important to note that we do have a $10 million debt issuance in fiscal year 2022. We've already started, we've had conversations with advisors to see what sort of options we have for debt issuances. So we have an excellent credit rating. So we will be exploring that if necessary in the next year. So it's not part of the 2021 budget, but it is something that we're planning to look into in fiscal year 22. And also we have in 23-24, we have $27 million in debt issuances planned to cover the cost of capacity projects in fiscal year 2023-24 and another $13 million in 24-25. So we have $40 million in capacity projects in those 2 years that we'll have to issue debt for according to our cap fee model. But again, this is a 5-year plan. It may or may not happen, but we're just planning to be prudent. So that was the summary of all the numbers. Now I'll show it to you graphically. Here are our reserve balances historically from 14-15 to 18-19 actuals, and they projected for 19-20 and the budgeted 2021. And as you can see, reserves have been climbing, but now we're starting to have a lot of project costs, especially in sewer. So we're getting a dip in the sewer reserve balances as a result of multiple large sewer projects, including the San Marcos Interceptor. We have a lot of Encina costs. Sewer
Someone needs to turn the speaker off.
Yes, someone needs to mute their mic.
So this next slide shows the reserve balances from 2016 projected to 2025. And this is just the water replacement reserves. So these are the reserves we look at when determining if we need how to set rates. So looking at 2021, reserves are budgeted or projected to be $34 million, which is well above the floor and below the ceiling. And going out to 2025, they're at 30 million, which is above the floor of 19 million and below the ceiling. So this next slide shows the total water reserves. So because the capacity shortfall brought the reserve levels down and we planned that $10 million debt issuance, with the debt issuance, we're actually in much healthier shape now with the reserve levels between the floor and the ceiling. So there's 2021 will be at 24 million with a floor of 16 and 28 with a floor of 19. And then looking at wastewater reserves, these are just the replacement reserves for sewer. And in 2021 we'll be at 51 million with a floor of 25 and 47 million with a floor of 31 in 2025. So well within the floor and the ceiling, and we have healthy replacement reserves. These are the combined replacement and capacity reserves, the total wastewater reserves. 2021 will be at 40 million with a floor of 25, so we're a ceiling of 65. We'll be at a balance of 42 in 2025 according to the 5-year plan, and that's above the floor of 31 and below the ceiling. So that includes the 2 debt issuances that we discussed previously to finance the capacity projects, and that keeps us within our reserve policy limits. So those are the reserve levels. Moving on to days in cash. This is the same slide you've seen before. So in the draft proposed budget, our days in cash for fiscal year 21 are projected to be 405, and through 24-25, they're above the threshold of 300. So next slide. Next thing I actually want to talk about is our credit rating. So we've gone over this before, but we were double A in 2011, upgraded in 2013 to AA plus, and we've maintained it since then, with our last reaffirmation in 2017.
And Wes,
Yes.
sorry, President. Wes, we also talked about the difference between a AA plus and a AA is probably nil. Means nothing to us.
So the difference between a AA plus and a AA would basically be our capacity to issue debt would be the biggest difference there. With a AA plus, we're more likely to get more debt, although the rate may not have a significant difference. So,
Right. But we don't need that much debt.
Well, we will be looking at possibly looking at the $10 million in the next fiscal year. So with a AA plus rating, that'll help us greatly if we look at different forms of debt like private placement loans, possible if we could look at taxable debt. So this way we have a lot more options and we can get lower rates.
Can't get much cheaper than what you can get today.
And that's one of the reasons why we're looking at our options in the next fiscal year, is because the rates are at an all-time low right now.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. So moving on to the CalPERS. So that's the budget. The next topic we're going to talk about is the CalPERS UAL funding, if there are no questions on the budget with all of the COVID impacts incorporated.
Are there any questions or comments before we move on?
President Evans, this is
Yes,
Director.
Director Elefar.
Yeah, I have a question, Wes, related to, I think it was Mike Arthur's presentation with an assumed, he mentioned an assumed water rate increase of, I think it was 3.4%.
Mm.
That was calculated in the budget model. I'm just wondering when that was assumed to take effect. Is that January 1?
The rate was assumed to take an effect probably February. I think I did it February 1st.
February 1st.
Yeah.
Okay, this current year, I think you had projected it to be January 1, and it actually didn't take effect till, was it March 1st?
March billings, yes, March 1st billings, I believe.
Okay. I'm just wondering if we're kind of on the same timeline with this projection.
Yeah, we're on the same general timeline.
Okay, so it would be in the maybe February, March timeframe?
Yeah, yes, of 2021, yeah.
Thank you.
And anyone else? Okay, Wes, I think you can move forward.
Okay, so now for our CalPERS UAL funding policy. This is the fun part for me. I have a lot of good times researching CalPERS and talking to actuaries. I've actually been on the phone with 2 actuaries, even though I'm only supposed to talk to one. One of them told me she's not our actuary, so I shouldn't be calling her. But I said I'll take information from whoever I can get it from. So as I mentioned, we haven't talked much about our funding policy, but hopefully you'll remember last year we went through similar challenges, or we went through some challenges in deciding how to fund our policy, and the decision was made to develop a 3-year payoff in which we would pay $16.1 million UAL balance over a maximum of 3 years, and we'd pay 1/2 of that in fiscal year 1920. We've now paid that payment in 1920 of $8,054,000, and we've got a new actuarial valuation, and we have the results of that payment incorporated into that valuation. So what happened was in the valuation that there was a method change that CalPERS went through, where they changed their methodology from a 30-year amortization to a 20-year amortization. And by shorting the payment cycle, it actually increased the amount that we owed and created a liability of about $2 million for us, and created a liability for everybody else as well. However, in my opinion, it's a good change because 30-year amortization is a lot longer and it's a 7% debt. So, I'd rather shorten that period. The other thing they did was they got rid of what they call a ramp up. So to make their liabilities more affordable, they let you pay 20% the first year, 40%, 60%, up to 100% over 5 years. Basically, you're only paying 20% of what you should be paying, so it creates built-in negative amortization. I know it sounds complicated, but they've eliminated that, which is good for all the member agencies. But that also costs money. And they reduced the discount rate from their expected returns from 7.25% down to 7%. So all of those things combined resulted in the district owing or having an additional liability of about $2.3 million on top of the 16.1. So we ended up actually closer to 19 million. But we paid off $8 million of that. So now our liability is $11 million. So what we, in the policy developed last year, we said that we'd revise the policy annually when new actuarial reports are released, and we'd include them in budgets for future fiscal years, 2021 and 21-22, which is what we're doing now, and actually part of what I just discussed in the actuarial reports. So looking at that, we now have an $11.3 million liability to look at over the next couple of years. So we're going to be discussing how we want to address that and looking for direction from the board. So our policy also states that we'll maintain flexibility. We're not going to lock into any formal arrangements with CalPERS. We haven't agreed to pay anything with them, so we don't have anything that, we can, per board direction, we can change the amount we want to pay and when we want to pay it. And then we'll avoid overpaying. So by looking at it every year like we're doing and discussing this with the actuaries, we get our current balance before we pay it so we don't overpay the liability and become super funded. And finally, we'll provide updates. So by providing updates to the Finance Committee and the board, we keep you up to date with everything that's happening. And I'm always happy to do that because this is one of the topics I like to research and talk about. So if everyone's as excited as me, I'll move on to the next slide. This is the UAL funding policy. This is a screenshot from the budget for last year, which illustrates the 3-year payoff. And the first line shows our additional discretionary payment. We paid $8 million in fiscal year 20, and our policy said we would pay $4 million in fiscal year 21 and $4 million in fiscal year 22 to cover the full liability. So the liability has changed now, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But one thing I do want to note is that the required payment on the UAL, this always exists. So we have the debt, it's a 7% debt, and there's a required payment, a minimum amount they make us pay on the unfunded accrued liability. That's in addition to or besides our normal contribution on salary. So this is just on the unfunded accrued liability. So looking at that, you can see that it was originally $1.1 million in fiscal year 20. We had to pay that because that actually, we were billed for that before we paid the $8 million. But in paying the $8 million, we changed the future required payments because we lowered our debt. So the note here says required payments on the UAL will change when new actual reports are released, and they'll be reduced when we make those additional discretionary payments. So what happened was in fiscal year 21, we paid the $8 million, and this $1.3 million shown here was reduced down to $880,000. So it was actually reduced by $457,000. So when we got the invoice, we saved $457,000. That's important to note because I'm going to be talking about that in the scenarios I'll present in a minute. So in looking at scenarios, so for the upcoming fiscal year and the next fiscal year, one of the options staff has looked at is paying the $11.3 million off in 2 equal payments of $5,650,000. So if we do that, the payment this year in fiscal year 21 would be $5.6 million. The interest savings in total is going to be $10.3 million. And the reduced payments, which are those payments I talked about before, the required payment reduction over the full 5 years of our budgeted plan would be $3.1 million. So in doing that, it's also important to note that days in cash in this fiscal year would go down to 394 from 405. But for the 5-year plan, we'd still be above the 300-day threshold, and our reserve levels would be above the floor. So the next scenario we're looking at is paying it off over 2 years, but going with the previously scheduled amount. So paying off the $4,027,000 in fiscal year 21, and then revisiting it next year in fiscal year 22 to look at the remaining balance and seeing if we want and bring it back to the board for direction on whether they want to pay the full balance or pay a different amount. And in that scenario, we would pay $4,027,000 in fiscal year 21. Our interest savings would be $9.8 million in total. The difference between paying it the 2 equal payments would be $472,000 less in interest savings, but we would still have reduced payment savings or savings of $2.8 million over the 5-year plan that's incorporated in the budget. So our operating expenses actually would go down by $2.8 million, and that's a benefit, a major benefit to the ratepayers. In that scenario, and also important to note that I should have known this previously, but the draft proposed budget that was sent to you actually has $4,027,000 incorporated in fiscal year 21 and 22 for the previous funding policy. So it's already in the draft proposed budget, at least in fiscal year 21 for $4,027,000, and there's another in fiscal year 22. So, and also we're above 300 days in cash for the 5-year plan, and we're above the floor, so reserves are still healthy in making that payment. And looking at the next scenario, this would be just maintaining the existing 3-year payoff policy per the fiscal year 1920 budget. So this means we would just pay $4,027,000 in fiscal year 21 and $4,027,000 in fiscal year 22. It's important to note, though, that this method will not pay off the full liability because the liability is actually $11.3 million. So we'd only be paying $8,054,000. But using that method, we would pay $4,027,000 this year. We'd have $7,900,000 in interest savings. And the difference between making 2 equal payments and paying 2 equal payments of $4,027,000, so paying the full balance in 2 equal payments or paying $4,027,000 in 2 years, would be $2.4 million less in interest savings. But we would have reduced payments of $2.1 million over the 5-year plan in our budget. And finally, the days in cash in 21, fiscal year 21 would be 405. They'd be the same because it's the same payment as the previous scenario. We'd be above 300 on all 5 years of the plan, and we're also above the floor as far as our reserve levels. So all three of these are potential options for the board to consider. And some of the pros of these options, or any additional contribution to PERS, would be that the higher the extra payment, the greater the interest cost savings, as you can see here. So if we pay off the 5.65, we're actually going to get more interest savings. And the quicker we pay it, the more interest savings. The higher the payment will result in a higher reduction in the required UAL payment. So you can see the 5.65 actually resulted in the reduction in the UAL payment, the required payment of 3.1 million versus a lower payment on the other 3 options, or the other 2 options. But some of the cons are, the higher the extra payment, the greater the exposure to market fluctuations. And a lot of people are wondering, well, with COVID-19 right now, we must be seeing losses in the market, and how's PERS doing? And I've had conversations with the actuaries, and the expectation for this fiscal year, which ends in a couple months, not even about a month, is that they'll probably return about a 0% return. And 0% overall is not bad considering the market conditions with all the losses that people are experiencing. They're actually going to get a 0% return. Unfortunately, they build in an expected return of 7% on their portfolio, and they sort of bill us for that. So that equates to—
wait, hold up.
Yeah.
Hold up. A 0% return for the quarter, not for the year. COVID's only been around. Let's not blame everything in the universe on COVID.
No, so the market, because we had losses in stocks and everything, so the market overall has plummeted. And PERS was actually experienced, they had a 6% positive return on the year. And as a result of COVID, it fell. So on March 22nd, I watched a webinar with them, and it had fallen down to a negative 4% return in their overall portfolio. Now, it has actually rebounded a little bit since March 22nd and is back to about a 0% return right now.
Thank you.
So they're looking at least in conversations, and anything can happen from day to day. Right now, they're saying it's probably going to be around 0%, which will result in a loss because their expected returns, or their basically what they asked for, is a 7% return on their portfolio. So if they don't achieve 7%, it's still a loss in that. And I'll show you some of their returns in just a minute. So that's what. But the other side of that coin is, the higher the payment, the more the exposure. So you could have greater losses if you give them more money. But if you give them more money, you could also, you benefit the gains more. So you have more of the portfolio, and when they have gains, you get the benefit of that. So it's a double-sided coin. So if market's bad, it's worse. When it's good, you get more of those benefits. Hopefully that summarizes that. Hopefully that explains it well enough. So, and the last thing I wanted to mention for a con is that there would be less flexibility to react to COVID impact. So we're still not sure what's going to happen in the coming months, with COVID. Will the market continue to fall or will it rebound? So if we only pay, say, the $4 million instead of the 5.6, that gives us the additional $5 million we can hold, or 1.6 million, and hold on to it until next year. And then we can look at the market again and see how it's performing and decide whether we want to pay, the remainder of the balance. So with that being said, and I want to talk about the returns in a minute, but that being said, staff is currently recommending to the board that we pay it over the 2 years, which means we would pay the $4,027,000 already included in the draft proposed budget, and revisit it next year to see how we want to address the remaining balance.
Okay.
This next slide shows CalPERS historical returns. So this is basically how they've performed over the last 20 years. And you can see, it's hard to see, but the blue line is actually the target line. It's not zero. So they're not having a lot of zero returns. If you look slightly below that here, hopefully you can see my cursor, zero's down here. So over the 20 years, they've only had 4 times where they've actually gotten negative returns. Overall, they've had positive returns, for 16 of the 20 years. And they've actually come really close to their target most of the time, with the exception of the 2009 recession, which was, a negative 24%. It's also worth mentioning that CalPERS has had some significant changes in both their staffing and the way they're investing. And they've prepared for the recession, and listening to their webinar, they discussed this, where they're much better prepared for what's happening now with COVID than they were during the 2009 recession. Their portfolio is built with a longer duration so that they're able to absorb the impacts more. And that's how they're able to attain a 0% return versus getting losses. So you can see here the latest one last year in 2019, the target was 7%, and they came in at 6.7%, just below their target. And the table at the bottom shows their averages for 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, and 3 years. And their actions compared to target are actually really close. And the last 3 years, they've actually performed above their target at 8.8%. So kind of the theme to this slide for me is that even if they experience losses and it impacts us, it will bounce back overall in the long term. So we're better off to own a larger portion of the portfolio than to own a smaller portion, because these liabilities that they have are 7% debts, and it's almost like having an interest-only loan. And it's just not good to have those. So it's better to pay them off than wait. So with that, that's our recommendation for the board, and we're looking for direction to bring to the June 3rd meeting.
Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be some, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Who is this? Is this Director Hernandez or Director Martin?
Martin, sorry.
All right, thank you. You may go.
Okay, Wes, I really thank you very much. Awesome presentation. And giving us numbers we've never had before, and I appreciate that. So we're looking at, according to Mike, 3.2%, I think you said, increase in water, a 0 increase in sewer. Doing your chart here, whether we pay the first way or the second way, how does that change the percentage of increase going to our ratepayers?
So it doesn't, according to the draft proposed budget. And the reason for that, and this is what Mike was discussing, was that our rate increase is basically just a pass-through, and we're actually absorbing some of the rate increase from the water authority.
Right, but what I'm saying is, whether we pay 5.6 or $4 million, it doesn't change any increase.
It won't change it for this fiscal year. If we revisit it next year and say the required payment for the UAL is less, and we have savings in operating expenses, we may adjust it for next year when we look at the budget. That's kind of the best way I can answer that question.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, anyone else?
President Evans, this is General Manager Purum, if I may.
Yes, thank you.
So this is an area that we do want some of board feedback. Our hope for the June 3rd board meeting is we'll be bringing a budget forward for adoption, and hopefully with not significant discussion. And that was the purpose of the workshop on May 11th, and tonight's meeting is to kind of go through all the details. So it would be helpful for staff to get guidance from the board as to what we should be including, which of these scenarios for the PERS UAL, which one should we include in the proposed budget for June 3rd.
Okay.
President Evans?
Yes.
I
think
we should stay the course in the $4,027,000.
Okay. Director Sinella, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with staying the course.
You're okay?
Well, yeah, but hold on. I'm okay. My preference is actually to go ahead and do the 5.6. I can live with staff's recommendation, although I think my preference would be to do the higher amount. Another kind of more general comment about the presentation and some of the things that, the cuts that were presented, we're kind of going through some unprecedented times, and I've been following, the state budget situation and school district budgets and the local, cities, and there's some serious cuts being both proposed and actually implemented. And I feel like our cuts, while I applaud the effort, we basically we pushed off some projects and we pushed off some purchases of vehicles, but we really didn't make any hard cuts. And so, as we go through this budget between now and June 3rd, I just asked staff to maybe take another stab at that and see what we can look at to reduce that burden on our customers, and especially they're all suffering right now too with COVID, and we don't know if this is going to be over with in a couple of weeks or if it's going to be with us through the rest of the year and into next year. So I just don't see the level of cuts that I'm seeing from other agencies and other municipalities.
I'm sorry, Director Sinella, you said you don't see the level of what?
Cuts.
Trust, T-R-U-S-T?
No, C-U-T-S.
Okay.
President Evans, Martin.
Yes.
Same thing. I think staff has done a yeoman's job at pushing off some expenditures to future dates. The CIP, that's good. You're able to push them off to future dates, but they're still going to come, and we still have to pay for them. The truck, I'm assuming, is one truck or maybe two pieces of equipment that you put off until the following year or the year after. That's still just putting it off. I haven't seen any cuts made where you can't just put it off. I mean, I understand what you're doing. I think that's great. But we need to look at COVID, because I personally think they're going to open this thing too soon, and we're going to have a much longer period of time. I think we really need to look at some serious ways of us saving money, and not just saying, oh, well, whatever it is, our ratepayer is going to pay for it. So I have a big concern about that, because I see school districts cutting, I see hospitals cutting, I see cities cutting, I see all these other entities cutting other expenses. And if there are opportunities, which I haven't heard of any, not even one, if there are other opportunities, I think we need to at least look into it and prepare for it in the future. I don't think we're there yet, but we could be in another 2 or 3 months. Personal opinion.
So Director Evans, if I can address that?
Yes, you may.
So what I'd like to say there is that, different cities and school districts and other entities, they're different operations in that they're more susceptible to certain impacts of COVID. Tax revenues and other types of revenues that cities have, it's different than what we have. So when they measure their impacts and monetize it, they may have more of an impact. So we've actually looked at the impact on the district, estimated it, and we've actually incorporated a 2-year sort of forecast for COVID to last. And I mean, 2 years is pretty conservative. And saying that 75% reduction in development and the other assumptions we've made have been super conservative. And saying that, and in putting in the COVID impacts over a 2-year period, I feel we've really accounted for the full impact on the district, and making up, the COVID offsets, 600,000 or 700,000 versus the 1.5. It's really only, $800,000 that we're looking at. And that should be the full impact, if not less, given what we've been looking into. And we've looked at everything, and we've been looking for months, and we've applied all the best sources that we could find. I've been watching webinars, and we've been researching everything possible. And I think we've really accounted for all the impacts on our industry and on our district.
And if I could add to that, so earlier on in the presentation, Wes did show some of the operational savings that we'd identified. So it's not all deferrals of CIP and vehicles. We're also not, we had contemplated putting a new position in the budget. We're not doing that. We've are only going to be filling positions that are really essential if they become vacant during the year. So we have done things. And piggybacking on what Wes said is, if our customer makeup was different, if we were a heavy commercial water district and we thought that the downturn in the commercial revenue because of COVID were going to seriously impact us, you'd be seeing a very different budget. But as Mike showed, our our revenue that comes in through commercial enterprises is about 10% of our sales. And that's not going away. It's being affected. I think we assumed a 35% cutback. So we're looking at about a 3, and then you look at a 5% increase in the residential. I think overall we're anticipating less than a 5% reduction in water sales due to COVID. That's less than we see from a lot of years just due to rain variations. So I'm not trying to downplay the impacts of COVID, but I think we've done a good job to estimate what the impacts of COVID would be on our organization. We're very different than a city. We're very different than the state of California that are, upwards of 60 to 70% of their revenue is highly vulnerable to COVID impacts with building closures and things like that. We're just not in the same position. I've been on numerous phone calls and teleconferences with other GMs in both the water and the wastewater industry, and almost to an agency, they're all seeing things the same way, that the impacts they're a little bit more than regular annual variation and variability, but it's not that much. So I'm comfortable with the budget we have in front. That's one of the reasons we're recommending the lower PERS payment, because it builds us in that flexibility to absorb COVID impacts that may be deeper or longer lasting than they may otherwise be. And we're always trying to keep in mind the level of service that people expect from us. And some of the impacts that we could make to reduce our operating costs would hamper that ability to provide those services and still be able to offer not discounts, but rate flexibility with customers for deferral of late fees and things like that. So we'll continue to look. And I don't know if either Director Sinella or Martin has a specific amount in mind that they'd feel more comfortable with.
Well, before either of those answer that question, I'm just wondering, Director Ellithorpe, do you have anything to say on this as well?
Yeah, as far as the PERS UAL scenario, I'd like to stay the course at $4,027,000 for this for this proposed budget. As General Manager Purim said, with a higher payment, there's greater exposure to market fluctuations, and there's just too many unknowns. I think this preserves more flexibility for us, so I would support that.
Okay. So Director Sinella, you look like you wanted to say something to Director Purim.
Yeah, and I appreciate the explanation, and I understand the differences between our agency and others in other municipalities and states and et cetera. But we're still proposing a 3.4 to 4.2% increase next year. So if we were proposing 0 or a minimal increase, less than 1%, then I could maybe buy that argument a little bit more. But since you asked for an amount, I would like to see a budget that is more in line with a potential increase of 2.5%.
Director Martin, do you want to respond?
As far as the PERS UAL, I kind of agree with a couple of the directors that I'd like to see go to $4 million. So you do have some flexibility, especially if it's around for next year. And yeah, I do think a rate increase of 2.5% is a lot better across the board, if that's what we're doing. I think it's more palatable. We just had an increase, or this year we had an increase, and I know water always goes up, but it's a more palatable. I think sewer we're doing a great job on. Yeah, Ed. So if you want a number, I think 2.5% is a much better number than 3.2%.
President Evans?
Yes, Director Hernandez.
I don't know if you can do this from the hip, either Wes or Mike, the difference to your average 15-unit ratepayer between 2.5 and 3 and whatever the number was. I mean, it can't be many dollars if it's even a dollar. From the hip, can you give me that information?
Well, this is GM Prum. I can, from my memory, last year, when the last rate increase, I think was a 3.5% rate increase. And we calculated that out for the average single family customer. That was about a $2.75 a month increase. Mike, is that close?
Yeah, it was like 290, 280, 290, somewhere around there.
So if you were talking the difference between a 3.4% and a 2.5%, so that 1% difference, it's going to be less than $1 a month, I would guess, impact, the difference between those two. So.
Again, I can't believe that a ratepayer would have, I mean, I know we have certainly the fixed income folks and the homeowners in the mobile home parks, all that jazz, but $1 increase, you can't, what can you buy for $1 these days? I can't even, short of gum and candy. Well, no, you can't not buy a Snickers bar for $1. So I don't think it's a big increase one way or the other.
Thank you, Director Hernandez. Mike, would you like to speak?
Yeah, just real quick. So with the 3.4% water increase, remember there's a 0% sewer increase. So I just did a real quick analysis. So if you combine the two for those customers, and about 20,000 of our customers, give or take, are sewer and water customers. So if we combine the amount with a 3.4% water increase, a 0% sewer increase, the average increase on a typical single family residence using 13 units of water is 2.4%. So that gets in line to what Director Martin said, the overall bill impact would be about 2.4%.
I would like to, yes?
Question.
Director
So
Martin.
that means we're not going to have any increase in ready to serve. We're not having any other increases. Is that correct?
So the 3.4% water is on commodity and ready to serve. The combined 2.4 already takes into account all of those increases that I just mentioned.
Are there any other increases contemplated?
Other than potentially pumping charges, which we went through before and said that pumping charges would be a pass-through of SDG&E, which is not part of this process. But we mentioned before, I believe we wanted a 95% recovery on pumping charges, but that is independent of this budget.
Thank you, Michael, again, above and beyond.
Thank you.
I would like to say, I have to, one, I think that if we were just talking about the PERS scenario, I think we should stay the course. I think we're smart to just pay the 4 million plus and then look at it again and see what we need to do for the next year, depending on where things go with the economy and with rates and interest rates. But as far as the budget itself, I really commend staff. I went through each of those single pages on your capital improvement and watched where you moved things around or you deleted or the price did come down in some places. We're not asking for any unusual salary increases. We're deferring, but we're not deferring to the point of what's the word? Not continuing to provide the same amount of service. So I feel even at 3.4% increase, you have to realize the cost of water is a pass-through. And although it's not determined at this point what the San Diego Water Authority is going to do, we know that they're talking 5 to 6% of an increase on us. We know that Met has suggested as much as they bring it down through a process, but for San Diego itself, it's close to a 7 to a 9% increase. So if we can do what we're doing and maintain a 3.4 rate increase for our ratepayers, which I think that's phenomenal, because that pass-through is going to come to us and we have to figure out how to take it away. And we have to figure out how do we pay for that and not ask our ratepayers for enormous 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9% increases. So I compliment all the work you've all done. I appreciate very much. I know the board does as well. You've done an amazing job. You do such a great job. I know you go through this with the finance committees and that, but as difficult and uncertain as these times are, I feel like for our district and for how our businesses run, I think you've done an amazing job. And I personally think support the pay over 2 years program, and I think the budget itself is wonderful. That's just me.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other comments? This is for information only, so I believe, actually I should be asking you, General Manager Pruitt, do you feel like you've gotten some guidance from us and overall you can?
I do. I feel I have gotten that, and I'd like to point out we do have a speaker. Mr. Hunsaker has indicated a desire to speak.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, Mr. Hunsaker.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay, you sound like that Sprint salesman. On the PERS UAL, in the past, they suggested that an 80% coverage was really the recommended amount. And I've seen some budgets where 80% of the total liability is considered 100%. I would appreciate a direct statement that we are truly have 100% coverage. I would also echo some of the recommendations to pay this off as soon as possible. Now, in the past on capital improvements and bonds and such, we talked about as much as a $25 million debt bond issues. Now we're talking about 27 million, and it appears to be another 10 million past that. So how much bonded debt are you really suggesting? And does that include or not include any private placement loans as well? On the CIP projects, the 67% increase is rather substantial, and cutting back on some projects, well, I think we need a table showing the changes. What is in, what is out, rather than going through all these pages and pages and then coming up with a list. I think that those should be itemized, what is being pushed forward and what is being pushed back. I've seen a lot of budgetary gymnastics in the school budgets, and one of them has been to eliminate a lot of maintenance, pushing it off into the future and approving much higher salaries. Well, you don't have the salary issue, the schools do, but you do have the budgetary restraints on having maintenance properly scheduled and done, and that the new capacity needed for new development needs to be factored in. This needs to be really, really drilled down into. Let's see. It should be pointed out as far as the UAL, this assumes a very low inflation rate. There are pension floors for benefits, which go up after purchasing power goes down to a certain percent. And then it's 100% increase of the inflation after that. What is the floor? Is it 25% purchasing power, and how is that calculated? Lastly, there's a mention of some flow meters. There's charges that are monthly that change with flow. And that would appear to be primarily commercial. I think that needs to be broken down too, because I don't really see any rate increases or tables of rates for flow meters that's in the annual budgets. And I think that needs to be addressed more, since this supposedly has a big impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have anything to say in response to any of that, gentlemen?
I can respond if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead, Wes.
Okay, so he asked for a statement that we would fund the UAL 100%. So our approval for this year is fiscal year 2021 would be to pay off the $4,027,000 from what I'm understanding, and then look at the balance again next year. And next year when we look at it, we will look at what 100% funding would mean, and we'll have to use board direction and our best judgment as to how to fund that. So if we're looking at potential market fluctuations or the market's growing and we think it's going to go up 10%, we don't want 100% fund, because then we'd be super funded. So we'll revisit it next year and we'll determine what that'll be. But currently our policy states that we'd be 100% funded within 3 years. So again, we'll revisit it next year to determine that. So we can't give a statement that it'll be 100% funded.
And if I can add to that real quickly, it's virtually impossible to get to 100%. You may be able to get to 100% at a point in time, but depending on the next year's market conditions, you may be underfunded or superfunded. So it's not like a mortgage where you pay it off and you're done. You can get current at a certain point in time, but the market fluctuations are going to make it change. So I think what I would recommend is next year, when we contemplate closing the gap at that point in time, we could then either adopt a new policy or modify the current policy that talks about how we want to maintain it over time. So we may get close to 100%, but then what do we do in every subsequent year to react to market conditions? So our plan was to get to 100%, but then knowing that that target is elusive and changes every year makes it pretty difficult to commit to that.
So then next, he mentioned the debt issuances, and we have in our 5-year plan, which again is not being approved in this budget, it's just part of the 5-year plan. In 2022, we'll be looking at options for a potential $10 million debt issuance. That's because current market conditions are favorable, and we have options as far as debt, and we have a capacity shortfall that we would like to potentially issue debt for at a low rate and take advantage of the market. Again, we'll be looking at all options of possible debt on that. And then in 2023-24, we have large capacity projects in sewer, and the total debt issuances for 2024, because there are also projects in 2025 at 13 million, would be $40 million. And that would be a tax exempt bond, more than likely, by identifying those projects and issuing that type of bond. By doing tax exempt, it's typically a cheaper type of debt issuance. Now, he also mentioned that historically we've had 25 million. We did have 25 million historically, but then we refunded it and we increased that amount to $45 million when we did the, I think it was I know for a fact when we did the 2015 refunding, we increased it to 45 million. So it's not that it's not typical to go out for a $40 million debt issuance for our type of industry. And finally, he talked about the UAL, and he mentioned a floor and inflation. I just want to say that in speaking with actuaries, we've considered all the factors of inflation, which basically they have tons of considerations they build in there, but I don't know, they've never mentioned a floor for it or inflation, so I'm not really sure what he's referring to there.
Thank you, Wes.
Hey, President Evans, can I just ask a clarifying question, and maybe more clarifying for for the speaker and also Mr. Hunsaker and the public. When you're talking about these debt issuances, you're not talking about like going out for like a bond like you would think of a traditional school bond, right? It's more like a loan.
So it depends. Sorry, I mean, hopefully I'm not interrupting you, but it depends. So when we go out in fiscal year 22 and we look for the debt issuance, we'll be exploring all options. There may be a private loan. There may be a taxable type of debt issuance we can do. We may also be able to do tax exempt bonds, which would be a municipal bond. We're going to look at all options and all rates available to us in all time periods to finance over and choose the best avenue.
Okay, well, there'll certainly be a lot to talk about as we get closer.
That's true.
Okay, there's no other comments or questions. I think we can move on from 2.2 and the end of our action items. You feel comfortable with that, General Prum? General Manager Prum?
Yeah, I do.
Yes, I know. You do, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the end of our actions. We're going to reports now, and the first one is our GM.
Yeah, I'll try to go through these. Am I on? I'll try to go through these real quick. So the board knows that we recently awarded a construction contract for improvements to the North Twin Oaks Tank #1. And I just want to let you know that we're getting ready to start construction on that. So that's good news. It'll be moving forward, hopefully expeditiously. Board also awarded the contract a while ago on the solar project, and just wanted the board to be aware that the panels for the solar project have been delivered to the Twin Oaks Reservoir site. You may remember that the materials had been delayed due to COVID and shipping concerns, but I think they're all delivered there now. We're still working on some issues regarding the lift station #1 site, and I think that with the city of San Marcos building closure, it's made it a little bit more difficult to resolve some issues, but we'll provide an update to the board when all those issues have been resolved. Third item, we will be performing some night work tonight near the intersection of Nordahl and Montiel. We're going to be replacing a fire service to a commercial development. We had tried to keep the businesses in continued service by highlining them, running it off a fire hydrant, but the high line that went through the parking area was disrupting access to their area, so we were asked to just do the repairs. We were trying not to do anything during the COVID time, but it's impacting things too much. So starting tonight, I think it's at 9 o'clock tonight, we'll be having a shutdown with the expectation that water service will be restored by 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. 21 homes will be impacted. We have reached out to those 21 customers. They know what's coming, and we've made arrangements to minimize the impact we'll have on them. We don't think there'll be many traffic impacts associated with the work, but like I mentioned, 21 homes will be impacted. Fourth item, the district will be opening bids on the San Marcos Sewer Interceptor project next Thursday on May 28th. It was scheduled for like the 12th, but there was a delay due to some questions that had come in. This is, I think it's the last segment to be replaced on the interceptor. So that's an important project. I think it may be an area of a lot of infiltration and inflow, which may increase how much demands we're putting on Encina and on Meadowlark. So hopefully this will curtail some of that. The project is being coordinated with the city's Creek District project. And we're, as we talked about before, we're hopeful that we'll get some good bids, although there are a few similar projects being in the bid cycle right now as well, which is competition, which isn't good. And so the city of San Diego has a project and the Helix Water District has a similar project. So we'll keep you updated. We'll open the bids next Thursday. We'll evaluate them and we'll make recommendations shortly after that. Wanted to let the board know that we have been reaching out to our commercial customers, particularly those that have been closed due to COVID, to let them know that there can be some concerns with their internal water system if the water hasn't been being moved through the pipes. So we've reached out to them. We've worked with the County Water Authority and the City of San Marcos and the Chamber of Commerce to identify who we should be reaching out to and to get the message out. And the message basically tells them what they should do before they reopen their business to make sure that their water supply is safe. The Vallecitos supplies have been safe all the time, but that's because water is constantly moving through our system. But if a commercial industry shut down their business for 3 months, you don't just go in there and open the pipes and start serving water to your customers. So we think we have it well in hand, and we've gotten good information, and Water Authority has actually been a very good partner. They've helped us to deliver that message. And last item for me, just want to let the board know, I think Director Sinella had asked this at the last meeting. On June 3rd, I'll be bringing forward an item to let the board know what our reopening plan is. So how is Vallecitos going to reopen? As we talk about the county and all the businesses reopening, what is Vallecitos going to do? And there'll be three kind of components to that, or three groups that are affected. One is the employees. When are we going to start bringing all of our staff members back in? The second group that's affected are our customers. When will they be able to come back in and come to the offices, come to our offices to pay their water bills and ask questions? And the third part will be conducting business meetings. So when are we going to get back to in-person board meetings? So the report on June 3rd will touch on those three components, as well as what else we're doing to make sure that the employees, board members, and staff are all safe when we reopen. So with that, that's all I had to share, President Evans.
Well, that was a lot. Yes?
Question?
Yes,
Martin?
Director Martin.
General Manager, you brought up the lift station. Number one, you're having some hiccups into us positioning some solar panels there with the city of San Marcos. I wish I'd like to be kept in the loop as to what those problems are for a number of reasons, but number one reason is maybe that's just a staff issue. But number two, if it's going to cost us any money to help Director Hernandez along, we shouldn't be spending any money on it because it's not going to take in that much money. So we may need to relook at that. But I'd like to know what the problems are that our staff is running into.
Yeah, and we can provide an update to the board about what the specific problems are. I don't believe we're incurring any costs. I mean, some minor staff time to coordinate the issues, but that site has never been as easy as the Twin Oaks Reservoir site has been. And I think as they get closer and closer to actually constructing it, some more issues are being raised. So, but we will provide an update to the board members.
Okay, and
Yes.
okay, we don't have another board meeting for 2 weeks, so perhaps you could jot those down and just send us an email on it.
Yep, we could do it that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
President Evans?
Mr. Gilpin, yes?
Before our attorney,
Yes.
I might be able to add a little bit that Director Martin, I've got a project in the city of San Marcos, and of course, all their staff is working off-site, and as slow as they were before, it's multiplied exponentially now. So just the standard project is taking many more times than normal.
Right. Now, are you saying something, Wes?
Yeah, Director Evans, if I could interrupt for just a second. We were
Yes.
supposed to have a special presentation on COVID. I don't know if we want to skip it for for time's sake. We can.
I'm sorry. I know this is sat here this whole time. I'm happy to hear it, but I will let it be at the discretion of my directors. How many of you are willing to sit through another presentation?
Oh, Martin, I'm looking forward to it.
Uh-oh.
Pardon?
Martin, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, 1, 4, 2, 4.
That's the only reason why I came to the meeting.
Okay, 3. All right, she's on. Thank you for reminding me. I don't know how I missed that.
That's fine. I didn't really kind of act like I was done. Maybe I was trying to get out of it because I will be presenting a little bit during this presentation. So unfortunately, you're going to have to hear from me and Mike again, but Alicia will be the star presenter here. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen on this one without complications, and it should be this. Can you see that? Oh, I went
Yes.
to the end of the presentation.
That was, yes.
There you go.
Start at the beginning. Okay, so I think Mike is, so this is our COVID-19 financial plan update. So what this is going to be is a first run or rough draft at some of the statistics that we're actually tracking. We've been tracking multiple data sources for the COVID impact, and we're presenting this to you today and hopefully getting some feedback on what you'd like to see in the future. So any input or feedback you have, it would be appreciated. So I'll start off by saying that this is actually from our track portion of the COVID-19 financial plan. So the agenda in the presentation will be, we'll talk about water sales and the COVID impact on that, water purchases, the delinquency charges, lock charges, and bad debt expense. And we'll go over all the indicators. Today, we're going to skip the actual versus budget because we don't have an approved budget with the COVID impacts incorporated. So there's not really a way to track what we budgeted versus what's actually happened yet. But starting after July 1, maybe at the end of July, we'll present that on a monthly basis, showing you the impact of what we estimated it to be and what's actually happened. But we will be today about some historical and current trends that we've actually been tracking and measuring, and present those to you today. And some of those are the trends, the number of late fees we've waived, the lost revenue as a result of that, some of the shutoffs that haven't been performed and the lost revenue, and how the bad debt expense is doing. Is it growing? And that's kind of what we'd expect to see during COVID times. So the next slide is actually Mike's slide. So if he's still here and still awake, he can start presenting on that.
Sure. Thank you, Wes. So if we can go to the next slide then. So this slide is just a repeat of what we showed in the budget. It just shows a composition of our customers. So again, about 70% of our customers are residential. The 10% that's really going to be impacted by COVID is the commercial and industrial type customers. So the next slide then, this is a graph that's in your board packet every month. It's currently in your board packet. So this shows water sales by our customer composition. So we break the customers down into 4 categories, really: the residential, the irrigation, the agricultural, and the commercial industrial. As Wes mentioned, we're going to be tracking things and reporting things. Most of this data we've already tracked. We're just getting in finer detail and reporting it to you guys. So what this again shows, this is the 3-year usage, and this is year to date. So for the fiscal year 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, and 20, that is from July 1st through April 30th right now. So this is only 10 months of data. So when you see fiscal year sales for 17, 18 of 12,907, that's not a full 12 months. That's 10 months worth of data. So I just want to make sure you know that, so you don't say what's happening with these sales. So currently year to date, we're tracking at a minus 3.8% compared to the previous year. So the next slide will be something that I'll report to you monthly that shows a more detailed of the previous slide. So what I'm, and let me add that a lot of these slides are going to be fluid, that if the board deems that, you know, we want to see different information or slice a different way, we'll always adjust and adapt to what you think is most important. So right now, this is our first attempt at trying to report something that seems meaningful. And what I also want to mention too is that some of the data that I report will be year-to-date data. So like I mentioned, from July 1st through currently April 1st. Some of the other data will be month-to-month data. So I might report April of 2019 versus April 2020. I want to make sure that you guys know that a month-to-month comparison sometimes is not the best way to compare things. Last April may have been really rainy. This April may have been something else. So I always want to put context to it. So if you see sales went up 10% or down 10% in a particular month, I'm never too concerned about that. It's more of the trend stuff. And when we start reporting in July too, a lot of the data I have will only be 1 or 2 months worth of data. And as you know, 1 or 2 points doesn't make a trend. So I will try to, if the numbers show that, hey, we're up 20%, down 20%, I'll try to put a little bit of context in it. So it doesn't, you know, seem as bad or as it might seem. So what this is again, just the 4 categories. And if Wes, you advance to the next one. So year to date for 2019, if you just look at the total sales acre feet, we were at 11,549 acre feet last year. And that equated to about $24 million in revenue. So the next, if you go to the next one, Wes. So in 2020 year to date, our current fiscal year, we're tracking at about 11,100 acre feet, which equates to about $23.5 million. And then the next column will just show the delta, the change from year to year. So you'll see that I mentioned that it's a 3.8% decrease in sales, in acre feet sales. In the revenue portion, it's minus 1.9%. So we might say, okay, well, if it's 3.8% decrease in sales, why is it not at least a 3.98% decrease in revenue? That's partly because of the rate increase that we just had. It's also important to note that when we look through categories, and the reason why I want to break it down by category rather than just say we saw a 3.8% decrease in sales, is that in 2020, it's a lot rainier year than 2019. And this is evident if you look at the irrigation lines and the agricultural line. Those two lines, there's a minus 9.5% decrease in irrigation and about 11% decrease in agriculture. And that's kind of expected when it's raining. People aren't watering, they're not watering their crops. For our residential and our commercial, it's about 1.5% to 2.7%. So that's the type of detail that I plan to show on a month-to-month basis, and then maybe even compare it to what we thought was going to happen because of COVID. Finance Manager West mentioned that for commercial, industrial, and other, we're expecting anywhere from a 35 to maybe a 40% decrease in demand. So when I report those numbers right now, you'll see it's 2.7. I'll also report it versus that 35 number. So I think that is all I have on these slides. So if there's any questions on what I'm going to present, or if during the meantime you guys have any additional granularity that you'd like to see, let me know, and I'm more than happy to provide more detail. I love the data, so I'm more than happy to provide it.
Director Evans, Martin.
Yes.
Michael, this is great information. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's a way for you to do this or not, but for instance, with agricultural, my curiosity is how many people or how many shutoffs have we had due to them closing down their business? They're no longer raising crops because they can't afford the water or whatever the reason. Well, the same with irrigation. I mean, we know a number of businesses that are going out of business because of that.
I don't want to steal Alicia's thunder, but Alicia is probably jotting down a note right now. You'll see some of that in her presentation, or it's something that we can provide.
Is Alicia Alethea?
I didn't hear the last comment.
Yes, Director Martin.
Okay, Alethea, okay. Just make sure it's on the right person.
Yeah, it's pronounced Alicia, but.
Oh, really? Okay.
Okay, so the next slide, this is one of the historical trends that we will show you, and this is just delinquency and lock charges collected. It's from 2004 through 2020 to date. So really, it's just a trend slide to give you some historical information. It's kind of just, and to get you up to date for this presentation. In the future, we'll be looking forward and how the impacts are affected versus our expectations. But looking at this, the blue line are the delinquency charges. And basically, historically, they've been increasing and they're staying pretty much steady to date. But to date, it's only been a couple months of the COVID, so we can't really tell if it's really impacting delinquency charges yet. But Alicia will give you some more detail on that. So she'll actually break that down a little more. Again, this is just an overall picture of history. But you can see on the lock charges that, historically it's kind of been up around $250,000 in total. And it's dropping off now because we're no longer charging lock charges. So we collected about $85,000 in 2020 and we don't expect to collect any more. So that's the delinquency.
I'm sorry, Wes?
Yes.
I'm sorry, President. 2018 and 2019, why did they drop?
That's So that's a good question. I'd have to look into it and see how many we had and what the amount was. It could have been just people paying their bill. And I think Alicia's actually going to show you some 19, and 19 was a good year for both delinquency and locks. So it may just be that people didn't get locked in 2019. Maybe they just paid their bills on time.
Okay, thank you.
And Wes, before you leave this chart, and you kind of mentioned it, but I want the board to be aware of, you're looking at a shape of a curve and how it performs over time, but look at the maximum amount. So even at its peak, we're talking about $250,000. So remember, we have a $90 million budget. So these things, although they're significant, aren't big rate drivers. So even if COVID has a significant impact on this, we're talking on the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars. So keep that in mind when you look at these, is not just the shape and the comparison of the curve, but the total dollar amounts that we're talking about.
Yeah, and that being said, it'll carry over into the next slide too. This is the bad debt expense slide. And again, the maximum amount of bad debt that we recorded in a given year was in 2009, and that was $112,000. This is in thousands, as you'll notice over here, and not in millions. So $112,000 is really not a big number in relation to our $90 million budget. However, we are tracking it as we track everything down to the minutia. And this is the historical bad debt expense from 2005 all the way to 2020. And this kind of tells a story that we'd almost expect to see, in that in 2009, we had the most amount of bad debt expense that we've experienced during the recession. And then over the next 4 years, there was recovery. And then in 2014, we were back down to pretty much normal levels. And we're starting to see a little spike now in the bad debt expense in 2020 over the last few months. So this is the historical amount. And again, I mean, we're only at $70,000 in 2020. So it's not a large dollar amount. But this is what it's looking like. And we'll be tracking this going forward and showing you how it relates to what we expected. So if there are no questions, it's time for me to introduce Alicia Saavedra, our customer service supervisor.
Good evening, President Evans and members of the board. I'll go ahead and continue. If Wes, you want to change the slide, I'll go ahead and start. So what we're trying to do is try to predict what our impact is due to COVID as far as for our customers, and how they are going to, essentially predict, or we are going to predict what's going to happen. So on this slide, we're tracking the number of accounts that were late for the past 3 years. So we can see the first graph here on the bar orange is March of 2018. And so here it shows about 1,600 accounts were late in March of 2018. We look next to 2019, more customers paid their balances on time, and that's why we see the drop in the bar. And if we see the previous charts here, 2019 seems to be a good year all around. So from here, we can see that we are trending towards the 2018 year so far. We can only see March and April for those 3 years, 2018, 19, and 20. Moving forward, we'll continue to show this here for you guys, and we'll have more information for May and June. But overall, we can see that average of 1,300 accounts are late each month, even in the last 3 years. So we haven't seen a spike in late accounts due to COVID as of yet. Okay, and so this chart here is the same numbers as a previous chart, but just in revenue loss. So we can still see the green bar there in the middle, 2019, revenue is not as high because customers are paying their bills on time. So the counts here, historically, the number of customers who respond to our pending lock notification is about 90%. So we're really not seeing too much difference here. And that's basically that chart, just in revenue versus the number of customers. Okay, and if there's no questions, we can go to the next chart. So our waive fees due to COVID-19 hardship. So here's where we begin to track March and April of this year. And this chart is going to separate between water and sewer. And the teal bar is just the total of the water and sewer. So it looks like a large drastic change, but it's just the total of the two. So from here, we can see that in late March, and we saw our opportunity to help our customers during these uneasy times. We allowed an additional waiver on the accounts, and we do approve 100% of those requests to waive the late fee due to COVID-19. In April, we waived about $677 specifically due to COVID-19 hardship. And our district policy is to waive one late fee every 12 months for a customer. So if a customer has had a late fee waived previous in the last 12 months, then we're not even considering that. If anybody calls in and says, I have a hardship due to COVID-19, we're gonna waive the late fee for them 100% of the time. And we'll, again, May and June, we can continue showing this trend, and we'll probably just show the grand total, not separate the water and sewer, but if that's something that we would want to keep there, then we'll go ahead and continue to show it this way.
Excuse me, President.
Yeah, question?
Yeah, Martin. The question is, of the other ones, your chart showed the previous 2 years, so we have something to equate to. This chart, you're only showing this year. Is there a reason you're not showing the previous 2 years, which would give us more of a feeling for the difference? Maybe it's just the difference in April's? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sorry. So this chart is just specific to the late fees we are waiving because a customer is requesting due to COVID. So we can also create another, maybe showing regular late fees and then COVID next to it to help show that some kind of a relation.
I see. No, that's not necessary. Okay. I got it. I didn't realize it was strictly COVID. Like,
right.
So all
Yes.
they have to do is say the word COVID and they get a buy.
Right.
Every month?
No.
There are, it's case by case at this point, and then we'll go into that. I do have another slide to go over some of those situations.
Okay. Sorry.
President Evans, just a quick question to clarify for me. Is
Yes.
the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 800, is that dollars or customers?
Dollars.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any more? Okay. So this one is going to go over our customers who are overdue 60 days or more and are eligible to have their meter locked for non-payment. But of course, due to COVID-19, we are not going to be locking meters. So we want to track this also here as far as our revenue loss on the lock meter. Of course, you know, we've only been able to track this since March, part of the month. April is a full month. Moving forward, we'll have a little bit more data to show you. But I wanted to at least show March on this chart just to have something else to put on there. So our accounts overdue slide shows the number of accounts that would be locked due to non-payment. And historically, the number of customers who would respond to that 48-hour notice that when they're overdue is about 97%, like I mentioned before. So in the month of April, then we would assume that 13 meters would have been locked due to non-payment had we not been in our current pandemic. Then, so with that, we would say we are assuming that we have a revenue loss of $1,950 in April. And we'll, again, once the months continue and we can track a little bit more, this chart will fill and look a little different. And so, so this chart here I just wanted to go over a little bit about how we are assisting our customers, what we are doing here in customer service to help our customers on a case-by-case basis. So this chart, I'm calling it customer care accounts. So due to COVID-19, our customers have reached out to the district for special assistance. Our customer service team has been assisting our customers with questions and concerns about their monthly bill. So the most common question is, what is the district doing to help them? So those customers are calling depending on what their situation may be. They may have just lost hours. They may be out of a job. Maybe, they have the illness and they can't go to work. So they're just calling and they want to know what we are doing to help them. So the numbers here on this chart are not necessarily going to reflect the amount of customers that have called us. This is just going to be the customers that have called us and we have done something for them. Either we've waived the late fee for them or we're going to be tracking them and holding fees for them. So in the future, they are not going to be getting late fees until their situation changes, and we'll go ahead and move forward again on a case by case. So our care account means that it's a temporary critical situation that needs special attention. So we call them special care accounts, and that's how we identify them in our system. So in March, we began to track these accounts, and we either made action or either waiting for a documentation or we waived a late fee. So the first bar count is 172. So these are just a number of times that we have held an account. We're waiting for proof of some kind of documentation to put them on a more of a permanent critical situation, or we have them on critical care. It sounds like medical, but for us, for our customer, it is critical because their situation is critical and it's their own personal situation. So we obviously take care of them, as best as we can. So of these, the next number, the one time, these customers of this 172 identified in our system, 50 of them have reached out to us and said, I need help. And, I'm out of a job. I won't, by the time I'm waiting for unemployment or whatever to come through, they have already been helped, whether we've waived their late fee or we held their late fee, and they called us back. We reached back to them, and they're no longer in this situation. It was very temporary. Obviously, we just started tracking it in March, so within a month, they're back up. And a lot of times when things are unknown, first things come through, customers call and they don't know what they're going to do. So we wanted to quickly identify them in our system, and situations change day by day. So we have now taken them out of that. It was just a one time. The next bar here is our active. So of these 172 accounts that we have in our system, the active ones, we either are waiting for documentation or they are part of our special care, or we just waived the fee one time and we want to keep them in our system identified that way so we can reach out to them and see if their situation changed, try to make some type of payment plans with them. But we also don't want to keep calling somebody because we obviously know that, we're probably not the first thing on their mind right now. But we definitely want to make sure that we are there when things change. So the last bar is our special care. So these customers have provided documentation to the district, whether it's if they are a business owner. Obviously we know businesses have closed, so we just basically, if it's a business account, we don't really ask for anything much. But a residential customer, if they have proof that they lost their job due to COVID-19, or they can show us something about unemployment, then we're going to go ahead and change their situation in our account to special care. So these customers, these 69 customers that we currently have, will not incur a late fee until we can identify when we're going to be lifting this special care from the account. So we want to make sure that we can reach back out to these customers in about a month and see what their situation is. Can we remove them off the special care? You know, has their situation changed? But for the meantime, these accounts here, we're not charging any late fees at all moving forward. And that is another thing that we would want to track is these accounts here, we're not charging late fee and we're not waiving it. So we're really not tracking it on the other charts. They're just not included at all. And as the months go by, we want to also track this number to see if this is going to be increasing, or, you know, are things changing with our customers. So this just gives us a little, you know, idea of how it's impacting our customers. It seems like with everything going on, it's this big problem. And what we're seeing here is a lot of our customers, yes, are impacted, but maybe they're just not calling us. Maybe they just assume that we know what their situation is. So these numbers could change. These are just based on if a customer is calling us and letting us know their situation. But that is all I had here for this chart. If anybody has any other questions, you know, ask.
Yes, Director Sinella.
Thanks for the presentation and great information. I'm glad that we're tracking all of this. If it's not too much to ask, can we have a repeat updated presentation in June sometime, please?
Yeah, sure. Director Sinella, our plan is to present this every month until we think we're out of the COVID woods. And in order to get the reporting thing finalized, I'm recommending that we take it through and maybe work with the Finance Committee to work out a system of reporting charts that seems to give the best information to the board. So it'll be refined over the next month or so. And then hopefully starting July 1, as we go into FY21, we'll have it ready to go for regular reports.
Yeah, I think it's great information, and especially for the board to be aware of. So thanks again for the presentation, and thanks to everybody on the customer service team. And I'm sure you guys are getting some heartfelt phone calls, and they're probably not always the easiest to take. So appreciate everything you guys are doing.
Sure, I'll definitely pass that on to staff. And yeah, you know, we are definitely hearing a lot of stories, and you know, of course, we're always here sometimes just with an ear, you know.
Director Evans, Martin.
Yes, Director Martin.
Yeah, Alicia, thank you very much for what sounds like a great job. My question is, and I appreciate it, there's two amounts of money. There's late fees, and then there's a commodity charge. And, you know, forgiving late fees is not a problem because it didn't cost us anything. The commodity charge, are people, when they come back, are they paying at least a commodity charge? Or are we waiving that as well?
We're just waiving the late fees.
Yeah, we've, Director Martin, there's no forgiveness program for the balance. So we're talking mostly about the late fees and lock charges. The balance is still intended to be collected, but I think there may be another slide coming up that talks about that.
Oh, I think that's great. I think I think you're doing a superb job, and yeah, I'm sure it's difficult lending an ear to all those people. It's a sad time for a lot of people, but great job.
I'd like to say a great job to all of you doing that as well. It's a difficult situation to be in, and you're doing a great job, and deeply appreciate this. This is great information, and it gives us a way of connecting with customers that we don't normally realize because we don't hear what your calls are about or what they're requesting. And I just wanted to clarify, when you have them in special care, those are the people who you are not actually on the other figures because they're not waiving a late fee. We just are not charging a late fee. Is that what you said? So they're separate.
Correct. Yeah, the special care, we have them on hold. Nothing's going to happen. No late fees. And in the future, when we start going back to being able to lock meters for non-payment, these are the accounts that we want to make sure that we have identified, because we want to be able to reach out to them and make some kind of payment plan where they can repay us, pay the current bill plus an additional. And of course, again, that will be case by case. We really don't know what's going to happen. But we want to kind of get a hold of these numbers and still keep in contact with these customers so we haven't forgotten about them, but we kind of want to trend lightly on that because we don't want to sound like we're harassing for money either in these times.
Yeah, I think we're going to end up seeing a lot of creative repayment plans that are way more forgiving than our current plan is. So
that was actually my next question. As these pile up, and then when we finally get back to whatever the norm is going to be, then all of these customers will come in and individually we'll work out payment plans with them. Is that so there'll be a whole lot of other work to do as we come to the end of this as well. Well, good job. Good job.
Wes, did you have any more slides on this? You're muted.
I don't think there were any more slides. Not for my part.
Yeah, that was the final slide of the presentation.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
I have another question, if I may.
Yes.
For Alicia, Director Martin. My question is, using a lockbox, are we losing money because people refuse to use it? Or have they found out how to get a check or write a check or do something where they don't have to come in the building? That's something we've talked about for some time, about the need for having the building open so that people could come in. But are we losing any revenue not having it open?
Wes?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to answer it or you want me to. So overall, Director Martin, overall, we haven't really seen a decrease in the amount of receipts on a daily basis. We've seen a shift in the receipts. So obviously we're not getting cash anymore, but we're seeing an increase in, say, InfoSend payments, which is our online either a credit card or bank payment system. So that's starting to
awesome.
So people have just found a way to pay their bills.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to also add to that. We just implemented last year the new way to pay through our vendor Pay Near Me, where a customer can pay cash at any CVS or 7-Eleven. That was new, and you probably see it on your bill. It's a little barcode. But the customers who typically come in and pay cash, we've seen a slight increase. It was fairly new. So, I mean, where we would normally see 1 or 2 payments a day, maybe we're seeing 7 or 8. So it's not that much of a difference. We have increased the number of payments in our box outside, and as far as check form, check or money order.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Does that conclude the presentation then, Wes?
It sure does. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I apologize that I skipped you there and made you sneak in at the end. I'm so glad you did. Thanks for hanging in there.
No problem.
Okay, now we're going to hear from someone who has spoken so much. We're tired of hearing his voice already, and that would be Jim Gilpin, if he's still here.
I'm still here. I'll try not to use up a lot of time. I just wanted to alert the board with the COVID impacts on the courts have been closed. San Diego County is going to be opening up, quote unquote, next Tuesdays. They're going to begin taking filings, etc. I'm going to ask Glenn to set a closed session for the next board meeting so that we can brief you on what is a statewide 218 case that has been filed. Vallecitos, along with 81 other public agencies in California, have been named in the case that's been filed in Santa Clara County. One of your local ratepayers filed the action relative to Vallecitos. There are 81 individual plaintiffs named in the case. So a number of other San Diego entities have been named, including the Water Authority. So I'll ask Glenn to set a closed session so we can come brief you all on that case, where it is. It's been stayed, but with the COVID lift, it will start moving. So, Director Sinella?
Yeah, Jim. Of those 81, is it just the one in our service area, or is there more than one in our service area?
One plaintiff.
Yep.
Yeah, it's only one plaintiff. This law firm up in Northern California basically created a website and solicited plaintiffs, and so they ended up getting one plaintiff for every entity that they sued, and then they've got an overall class plaintiff. So that's why there's 81 of them versus the 80 public entities that have been sued. But it is only one out of your service area.
Thank you.
All right. Then we'll move on to the County Water Authority. I have nothing to report. The meeting is next Thursday, and I certainly have something to report when we come home back from that. So we're going to the Encino Wastewater Authority. Gentlemen, would you like to be first, Director Hernandez?
Yes, we had our meeting this morning, actually, and we're moving ahead on all of our capital improvement projects that we've talked about in the past. Nothing extraordinary, so I won't belabor the discussion. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you. And Director Martin?
Policy and Finance will be meeting again next month. I already reported out for this month at the last meeting.
Okay, great, thank you. And that would leave us standing committees. Do any?
Finance, we were all there last Monday.
Okay. And I'm not sure if anyone's been to any meetings, conferences, or seminars that they attended. Otherwise, I think that's the end of the reports. We have other business. I don't know what that would be. Oops, I'm sorry, I hear somebody. We all know there's meeting on June 3rd for sure. And then directors, do you have any comments or future agenda items?
Yeah, a quick question. Glenn, I think you control the board there. When those noises come in, their green light must go on around their name. Can you shut them off?
Yes, I do have the ability.
We had all types of stuff going on.
Yeah, I do have the ability, but I can't always determine who it is, where the sound's coming from. It may be beneficial at some point in the meeting, President Evans, to remind people to keep their microphone off when they're not speaking, because it's just probably picking up ambient noise in wherever they're at.
Okay, I will do
Glenn,
that.
an alternative, maybe you can mute all and then the people who want to speak can unmute themselves if it gets real bad.
Yeah,
I know you can't tell. Yeah.
Yeah,
President Evans?
Yes, Director Hernandez.
On this item, Director Prum, do we have an update on the battery potential lease probably with the COVID thing, it's probably stalled, but I just was going to ask.
Are you talking about the company that had reached out to me?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I reached back out to them and they've been radio silent. So I don't know if they've given up or if it's COVID or what it is, but no movement on that.
Thank you.
One more question,
Yes,
President. One more question. Of the general manager, the vehicles that are parked at lift station 1, what are they there for?
If James is still here or Ed, I think we allowed somebody to use that site and I forget what it was for. So Ed or James, are you there?
Yes, General Manager Prum. So I know that those vehicles parked there for a little bit for the solar project as they're assessing stuff, but I don't believe they should have much there now. They may have a few vehicles left because they were out here prior to COVID hitting. And then when COVID hit, they sent their guys back to, I believe they're in Houston, Texas. So it may still be there from that, but I'm not too sure. I'll go and ask, and then I'll confer with Ed and give Glenn, General Manager Prum, an update.
All right.
Thank you.
Is there anything else? Well, then I'd just like to thank you all who are listening in. We appreciate it. And thank you all for your time. Have a lovely night. We are adjourned.